So next up is James McKemey from PodPoint, a leader here in the UK for charging infrastructure solutions. Now, once again, massive thank you to our audience for getting those great questions in already. Some of them a little bit too complicated, but we will take them away. If you have questions for James, please just get typing them into the Q&A as soon as you would like. Now, James, one of the challenges with fleet electrification is this chicken and egg that we've talked about, and the challenge of charger access. So whether that's investment in deploying your own charge points as a business, or confidence about access to third-party networks. So can we kick off the conversation, talk a bit about that? I think you might be on mute. Yes.
I am no longer on mute. Thank you very much indeed, Mary. Thank you very much indeed for the invitation. Yeah, so there's absolutely no doubt that charging infrastructure is rather critical to the world of fleet electrification. We demean our product development team by suggesting we make plug sockets with radios, and ultimately that is exactly what we do. That's what they are, but they are fundamental to the transition. And I think your question usefully alluded to there is no one type of charger, and there is no one sort of charging solution. So when we look at a fleet application, it's really important to understand the dynamics of the fleet. And we've had Geotab talking about understanding telematics, about understanding the type of fleet, their operations, their range requirements, all those sorts of things. When it comes to the charging infrastructure side, the things that we're really interested in is dwell time, where that dwell time takes place. So you're talking about public networks. I think if we look at a fleet, typically we're made up of employee vehicles, which live at people's homes a lot of the time, and then are driven to work and can be charged either at home or in the workplace for the backbone of their charging. Then you have company vehicles, which may well live at a company depot or fleet type application. Now, any of those kind of vehicles which have a very, very long dwell time at a particular site really are prime candidates to go electric. They're very easy to get to. Essentially, the slower your charge rate, the more affordable your charging infrastructure is likely to be. The more challenging vehicles for us to get to, we've already talked a little bit about HGVs, and that's as a physicist, Mary, that's one of the challenges to get to in the long run. But if we think of those who may not have off-street parking at home, who don't visit say an office every day, they go to a different site. So I guess a classic example of this would be let's say a tradesman with a van who may well live in a city with no off-street parking. It's difficult to get him to charge his vehicle, and every day he attends a different site. Therefore, installing a charger for him is probably without, outside the bounds of what is possible for his company. That's going to be one of the more challenging. As such, probably those vehicles are going to go electric latest, okay, and they're going to rely on the development of the public charging infrastructure, which is going to take place largely on the backs of those who can charge more easily, be that at home or in the workplace. One key thing to consider is home charging increasingly is smart charging, and all usage going through home chargers is recorded. And that's one of the things we're seeing quite a lot of now, is reporting back home charging usage for the purpose of work expensing, etc. But in terms of when we approach a fleet, we're typically looking at how do we electrify your workplace, and how can we work with your staff with regards to home charging.
Very, very thorough approach there to the role of EV charging then in kind of the whole of that spectrum of adoption of vehicles at different stages. What about the business case for fleet electrification?
Yeah, well, I think our previous speaker gave some of the indication of the lower running costs. Electricity is cheaper than petrol. It probably always will be. The government is likely to lose fuel duty, but at the moment we don't expect that to appear upon electricity bills, more likely road pricing. We'll do that. Fewer moving parts. It's something like 100 times fewer moving parts in an electric car drivetrain versus an internal combustion engine. So it's clear there are benefits to be had from the transition in terms of the lower running costs. Of course, infrastructure costs money though. So we've now got an additional cost. Typically, most organisations will not be installing their own fueling infrastructure, and this will be a new outlay for them. But the thing is, if you're looking really 3 to 4 times lower running costs, you can make sense of an additional outlay on vehicle and indeed on infrastructure as well. So in terms of case studies, you know, we've got quite a number now of successful workplace installations and fleets transitioning. So one of our case studies you'll find on our website is of Skanska, the building firm. They were our first big array. So it's about 67 active chargers in one car park over there, with capacity in that system to go to 253, I think. We're seeing excellent utilization of that infrastructure, and we're also seeing it growing very handsomely as well. There was a study in the US a few years ago which found getting an open charger at your workplace car park made you 6 times more likely to drive an electric vehicle, which is an impressive stat, but entirely predictable. If you imagine there is an available charging point at your work, yes, that will make you much more likely to drive an electric car. So it's a very, very effective thing. If we look at a couple of others, we've got some interesting work we're doing with a major broadcast organisation where there is indeed some charging going into their workplace car parks. But there's quite a significant operation to ensure we're recording all their home charge usage as well, and sending that back to the fleet managers, etc. So giving that total picture in terms of costs, etc., allows organisations to make it very clear that they are realising some of these potential benefits and realising that potential business case.
Amazing. So you've hinted at well, not hinted at, but you touched on with some of those examples that fleets and workplace charging can have an impact beyond just the fleet itself. So is there anything else you can say about that? Because fleets are such a large segment of the transport sector. So, you know, there's such a room for influence across the board in terms of fleet adoption in the UK.
Yeah, hugely. I think it's really important to recognise, you know, we're trying to get mass adoption of electric vehicles. The reason we're doing that is because we need to really decarbonise the grid and realise the benefits of that. I have been to one of Poppy's sister organisations' events where someone stood up and said, all your grants are directed towards new vehicles, and that's not fair because most retail consumers are buying second-hand cars, which of course is true. So what are you doing to encourage the growth of the second-hand market? Of course, you can't supply a second-hand vehicle, you can only supply new. And over half of new vehicles are bought by fleets. So it's really, really important that we can encourage fleets to go electric, because they provide the stock of vehicles which become second-hand vehicles, which become affordable to the retail consumer, etc. The one other element I haven't touched on the previous answers is of grid capacity. So dwell time is one element of choosing the right type of charger. If you've got a high dwell time, you can have a low powered charger, 7 kilowatt charger, for example, and they're very easy to load manage. If you've got a very short dwell time, you need a very high powered charger, much harder to load manage. So for example, you can have 27 load managed 7 kilowatt units for one 50 kilowatt DC unit if it's unmanaged. 27 for one, and the cost is usually approximately the same there between the two. Marrying those two up is very, very important, and grid load management technology, making the most of the available capacity, is absolutely critical, because that is the constraint on workplace installations that's universal. It's at every site you go to as you start to look towards mass adoption. I'm conscious we're coming to the end of our 5 minutes, so I need to get that one in.
No, absolutely. But I think brilliant, just touching on the importance of those particular sites and that challenge of the grid connection, which obviously with projects like that is such an important thing to be starting with at the beginning, and understanding how that scopes where you are and how you phase it, for example. So we've had a lot of questions in. We have got a couple relating to drivers going home at night. So one of them is asking whether you have any creative solutions to fleets that are primarily driven by drivers taking commercial homes off night, and particularly picking up that the vast majority might not have access to off-street parking. And then on a similar note, Simon Gardner's asked, living in a terraced street, how do you resolve cross-pavement charging? Any more thoughts on at-home charging or that particular challenge of terrace housing and cross-street charging?
Sure. So on your first point, we have a luxury in the UK that actually the majority of drivers can charge at home on our street parking. So according to PwC's research about 2-3 years ago, 72% of drivers have off-street parking at home. That's a luxury that the likes of Amsterdam can't afford. They have 95% on-street parking, for example. So we can get a very, very long way on adoption and mass adoption before that becomes a hard stop. On the second question, how do you stop people trailing cables over pavements? We won't install the chargers, is the answer there. So we have legal obligations that we can only install in certain circumstances. We can't foul public rights of way and things like that. Of course, that leads on to, okay, so what do you do about those who can't charge at home? And in fact, prime answer, there is no one silver bullet, I'm afraid. There is no, well, we've got a perfect universal street charger that does every application. That doesn't exist. We may have more on street charging, but it's going to be a mix. It's going to be a mixture of solutions. And in my view, actually, the workplace charger might be the most useful of all. If your car is doing, and they usually do now do, 250 miles or more of range, if you're charging at your office 10 miles away, you're going to find that really does the backbone of your usage, and then you can use the public network, the destination chargers, the en route high power chargers to get around to do the rest of your charging. So actually, we're talking about fleet, which obviously leads on to workplace. We think that's a huge part of the solution. We actually model in the fullness of time. We think about 60% of all energy will go into people's cars at home. 30% will go into cars at work. So between those two, 90% of all charging, which is, to a rounding error, almost all of it.
So yeah, really interesting perspective. I'll be cheeky with my kind of host prerogative. I'm throwing something in myself here, which is that we've had a press release out. I think it was just this week actually, from Oxfordshire County Council and Oxford Direct Services, the City Council's company, discussing their feasibility study, which is very early days, but it's looking at a cable gully solution. And not just the cable gully solution, because that in itself is a very, very simple, bit like a storm drain gully that you can put into the pavement. Actually, as a solution, that's really, really neat. What's complicated is the permissions and things and working out where it can go and all the rest of it. But for anybody interested in that, I'm pretty sure it went out earlier this week. So searching for Oxfordshire County Council cable gully will pull up something to look forward to in the future, we hope.
Yeah, just on that, I think they are neat solutions, but of course it's only one scenario. And Oxford obviously is a beautiful city with many sort of terrace houses with cars parked on the street outside, and that's perfect. That's a scenario. I am someone with no home or work parking, and my car is parked down the lane there on the side of an area. A gully's going to do me no good at all.
No, absolutely, it's not a silver bullet.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, we welcome all those innovations.
Absolutely. Now, I've got distracted myself with that because there was something in here, something in what you said, and I was going to neatly move on to another question. Let me just pull up and see what we have got here. Oh, here's an interesting one. It's picking up on the question of grid connection side of things. It might be a bit technical, so let's see where we get to. But Joe Weatherall asks, are there any grants available from the UK government to support businesses in procuring low voltage networks from local DNOs, i.e. existing low voltage networks are too small and requires increased cables or capacity? So is that something you've come across, or are there other solutions or creative ways to deal with that grid capacity issue?
No, we've talked a bit that I think utilities have a big role to play. I mean, the fundamental limiting factor on the amount of chargers you can install in shared car parking is the LV grid. And absolutely right, quite often we need to bring in more capacity. And generally that's hard and it's expensive and it takes a long time. So it's a real challenge. Hence, load management has real value as the first step. But in the fullness of time, you do discover places where you need to bring in grid. You want to put in DC chargers, you've got rapid turnaround. We're starting to see that now with some fleets. You're probably going to have to bring in more grid on the LV network, etc. No, sadly, is the answer to a universal national fund for procuring grid. And it kind of gets worse. We've got real sort of market structure challenges there, where the person who triggers the upgrade of the substation pays for all the additional capacity, cannot depreciate that on their books, and the next person who asks gets it for free. So which is a problem. So there are challenges there. The government is looking at a couple of schemes, looking at some options there for passive infrastructure, things like that. But yeah, a direct grant for LV grid increases, no, that doesn't exist yet. But you are right to identify that as a key.
Absolutely, and actually, to be honest with you, I think a lot of not so much necessarily grants and the kind of grant scheme meaning of things, but innovation grants looking at smart energy systems, and so it's much more about the whole system and how it works and how it interacts and what the services and platforms that go with that, as well as the infrastructure, because you hit the nail on the head. What we don't want to do is have to spend all of the money on upgrading that overhead on the network, when actually we can make our existing energy system deliver more for us now just by being a bit smarter about it. So I think that's probably where 100%. A lot of the money is going, but it's maybe on the R&D side.
Yeah, 100%. Maximize flexibility is the first thing we should be doing. There will be some upgrading of the grid as well.
I've no doubt there will be, absolutely, especially on the DC side. So we will just take the opportunity to thank you very much, James, for the insights that you have given us. As with everyone, lots more questions that we couldn't get to, but we will have you back at the end for a bit of chat with our other panelists. So thank you very much.